Okay, so this is going to be lesson 7. It's all about audio on the edit page. This is either going to be your first or second lesson on day 2, depending on where you left off. And the very first thing you want to do is just to reset the user interface. So we're going to come up to the workspace menu, and right down the bottom, like we have before, just reset the UI and layout, and that will put everyone on the same interface, so you know what everyone's looking at. You'll also want to come up and change it over from a single viewer to a dual viewer just by clicking the button in the upper right hand corner, and now you have dual viewers here. So to begin on the audio lesson, you're going to come over to the 04 audio rough cut in your rough cuts bin and double click it to load it into the timeline viewer. And you start off this lesson by talking about markers and adding markers to the timeline. So you go through and you play through this clip and you talk about how you want to create a spotting list. And the spotting list is a way that you can play through your timeline and find locations that you might want to add sound effects. So you play this along, and once you play it and you come to the Lufthansa clip, what you do is you just end up selecting it and teaching how to add a marker. You do it the simplest way possible first. And you basically come over to the clip, you select it, and then you just teach them how to click the marker in the toolbar. And then you come down to the marker and you double click it to open up the dialog, and you give it a name. You show that you can give it a name. These are all going to be sound effects name, and this will be roaring jet. And then you can make it a red marker and just show how you can make these different colored markers, and then click done. Then the next one you do a little bit faster. You come over and it's going to be the 10 Maldives clip. For this one, you select it and you use the keyboard shortcuts, and it's M for marker twice. So you hit M, and it adds the marker and opens the dialog. And you again call this is going to be another place for sound effects. It is a seaplane, and we're going to make it red. Say done. So you're going to do 3 markers. The first 2 are on the clips. The last one is going to be over the South Pole clip, but you're going to make sure nothing is selected, so you want to make sure you tell them not to select anything. And when you do that, then you can hit MM twice again and open up the dialog. And when you open the dialog, you can come in and you can say sound effects, and this is loud prop plane, and it's red. And you basically explain that when you have a clip selected, it adds it to the clip, and when you don't have a clip selected, it adds it to the time ruler, so that if we were to pick this up and move it to the beginning of the timeline, the marker doesn't travel with it. The marker stays in its location. The marker does actually move if you trim. If you ripple trim, the marker will move in that case. But when you pick a clip up, it's not attached to that specific clip. So you just want to explain the different ways of adding a marker, whether it's on a clip, whether it's using the toolbar, whether it's pressing the keyboard shortcut or adding it to the ruler. And then once you have that, you then come in and you start talking about source clip markers. So we're going to go into our audio bin, and in the audio bin you have a couple of clips here. The one we're looking for is sound effects, and you're going to double click to load it into the viewer. And again, you explain, even though you've kind of reviewed this in lesson 1, you explain again that up the top you're seeing the entire track, and down below you're seeing a detailed view, and you can see the white box around this at the top here is the detailed view that you're looking at. So we're going to go to the beginning of our clip, and we're going to add a marker, and the first one you add is at this first peak. It's the very first peak that you come to, so you can have them play it and hear it. It's just a sound of plane. So you say, okay, we're going to add a marker here, and to mark it, we're going to go right to the peak. And you can either drag there or you can use your arrow keys just to make sure you're on the peak there. And then you can use the keyboard shortcut, just MM, to add the marker and to open up the dialog here. Now in this case, you can just give it a name And in this case, we'll just call it, C plane or overhead plane, whatever you want to do. It doesn't really matter. And then we can say done. You don't have to change the color on these. So now we have our C plane here, and we play it again. We play it a little bit further, and you keep going down, and you'll see that you come to another section up the top here, which is a loud prop plane, and you can play it to hear it. So there's definitely a point here where it becomes louder, and you can see the rise in the waveform. And that's probably the area that you want to do, just starting at the beginning of this loud prop. Now what we're going to do here, in this case, we are going to add a marker. We're going to press MM, and we're going to say, this is a loud prop, right? But we wanted to mark a duration, and we're going to mark a 3-second duration. And one way to do that is use this duration field, and we just come in and highlight the second field, and we say it's going to be 3 seconds. And now when we say done, you'll see that in the marker here you have a duration marker, right? In this duration marker, if you do it right, you have to make sure that you tab off so it holds it. Otherwise, when you close it, it doesn't. So you want to say done, and you can and you can see down the bottom how you have now a duration marker. So it's not just a marker in one location, but it's marking a region. And then you have one more marker to do, which is right in the center. You have this big peak here. You're looking for like a large jet sound takeoff, and that looks like a pretty good loud sound up the top. So we're just going to scroll down there, and then when you get to the beginning of it, you can see that in the detailed view. You can start to play. And that's pretty good. So we want that whole sound, and you're going to do a range in another way. You're going to mark an in and out point. Mark an in at the beginning of that sound, mark an out right at the end of that sound, and then you're going to right click in between the in and out points, and it's going to say convert in and out to duration marker. And when you do that, you now have a duration marker, and it's already highlighted. So what you want to do is then right click again and say modify marker. And when you do that, that brings up the dialog, and we're going to call this jet takeoff, right? And it already has a duration, so you can say, okay. So there are 3 different markers in your source and 3 different markers in your timeline. And in the next section, what you're going to end up doing is adding a new track and editing those sound effects onto the added audio track. So before we actually get into adding those, we want to set up our timeline view to look good for audio. So we come over to timeline view options and click it. We explain the 3 buttons up the top. If you want thumbnails or just thumbnail at the beginning and the end of the clip, or bars, which we are going to choose. We do want to see waveforms because we're editing audio. We're going to bring the audio up maybe, I don't know, halfway, just to make them larger. And the video tracks we're going to drag all the way up, because until you drag them all the way up, you don't actually see the markers in the timeline. So you want the video track to be all the way up, and then you'll see the markers. All right, and the last modification in the timeline you want to do is you want to, it has lots of space for video tracks, but it has very little space for audio tracks, so we want to change that. You just have to come right below the video track, kind of in between the video track and the audio tracks, and when you do, you'll get a resize cursor, and then you can just drag it up to the top, just to give yourself more room for audio tracks. And now once you have these audio tracks, a room for audio tracks, you can add a new one. So you can come over and you can right click over in the timeline header. You're going to come down to audio 2, and you're just going to right click, say add track stereo. So you can talk a little bit about, you add different tracks for stereo, mono, 5.1, or adaptive, which is just any kind of number. We're going to choose stereo, and you can tell by the little 2.0 that these are stereo tracks. 1.0 would mean mono, 5.1 would be surround, and things like that. So now we have an audio 3 track, and we want to be able to patch from the source clip, which has audio 1, A1. You can see right here is our source clip, right? And we want to patch that to audio 3 track on our timeline. So all you have to do is just click on that A3 and it will change to A1, and now you have A1 going to A3. So anything we edit will edit onto A3. So let's go and find our first clip that we want to do. So I'm going to hit the Q button right now on the timeline viewer being active. I'm going to hit Q to activate the source viewer, and then you can just hit Shift up arrow, and Shift up arrow will take you to the previous marker. Shift down arrow will take you to the next marker in the source viewer. Shift up arrow will take you to the previous, and we're going all the way to the beginning. And you can see that we have our first marker here, which is our sound effect of the plane, the overhead plane. And we're going to go to the Maldives clip because this is a great overhead plane clip. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit. Now what we're going to do is we're going to use a replace edit and kind of make a sync point edit in a way. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to line up and say, okay, at this peak sound, the plane is probably directly overhead, maybe somewhere right around here. That's when the loudest sound of this plane, if we were this cameraman, that's when this sound would be the loudest, when it's directly overhead. So it's probably about this sound in the waveform, right? It's at the tallest peak, which is the loudest point. So now what we're going to do is we are going to come into our timeline viewer and we want to mark the duration of this clip. We want to say X, right? And X, we already know, marks in to out. It's underneath the mark menu. It's called mark clip, and it's X is the short key. So when you do that, it marks an in and an out around the clip where your playhead is. Okay, so we have a duration already set for us. Now all we have to do is hit the replace edit because we don't need an in and out on the source. It's going to use the playhead position to line up with the playhead position in the timeline. So the loudest peak of the audio will happen where we would think the loudest sound would be in the video. And it's going to use these two playheads as the sync point just by clicking this replace edit feature. And then you can see our peak is directly in our playhead. So now when we back it up, it's aligned perfectly. All right, so that's our first marker. Now we're going to go to our second marker. But before we do that, what you actually want to do is we talk a little bit more about now that we have multiple audio tracks and you're starting to add more and more, you may want to give yourself a little bit more organization. And just like we organized our bins with color and our clips with color, you can organize the tracks with color. Instead of having just all green audio tracks, you can have them be different colors. For instance, we can come to audio 2 and you can change the track color to be, yellow, and then we can come to audio 3 and we can say this track color will be lime. So now we have different colors in our timeline to organize the music track being yellow and the sound effects track being lime. And our kind of dialogue is kind of this blue navy color. So that's just another way to organize yourself. So let's move on and go to other markers where we may have to add sound effects. Now, in a very short timeline like this, it's not a big deal. You can easily look up and down the timeline to find the markers. But in a much longer timeline you're working on, you may have markers all over the place, and when you're zoomed out, and we'll zoom out, the markers can be harder to locate, right? So you want an easier way to locate the markers, and that's when we come up and we talk about the edit index. So up in the upper left hand corner, you're going to click on the edit index button. It's going to open up the edit index down here below our bins. And much like a bin, the edit index shows you every edit in the sequence and every column of metadata. Now, we don't need every column of metadata, and we don't need every edit in this edit index. We just need to see the markers. So what you can do is come up to this 3-button options menu, right? Anytime you see that options menu, it's the 3-button icon is an options menu. You can click on it and say only show me markers. Now you could come down and say only show me blue markers or only show me the red markers if we only wanted to see those. So I'm just going to choose, show me the red markers. So now I'm whittled down to just seeing the red markers that are in my timeline. And I can, just like a bin, I can limit the metadata that I'm seeing as well. So I'm going to right click over any header. Just any of these headers, just right click, much like you could in a bin. And I'm going to say I don't need to see the reel or the video or the cut or the duration. Any of these, really, I don't need to see. I'm just going to leave on the color, notes, and the reel number, and that's it. And now what you can see is you have the number, the color that you're going to, and the note that you added here, sound effects roaring jet. So if I wanted to go to this sound effects roaring jet, I can just click on it, and you can notice in your timeline the playhead jumps to that marker in the timeline. So it's much easier than looking up and down the timeline for the markers. You can just see them right here and jump to them. It's a really nice way to do it. Now, we would also like a nice, easier way to locate the different markers in our source clip, because if you have multiple ones of these, you can't see their names and you don't know what you're looking at. So what you can do is in your audio bin, if you put the bin into list view, remember this is the thumbnail view, and to the right of that you have list view, and you can click on that. And when you do that, any clip that has markers on it will have a little disclosure arrow to the left of the name, and you can click on that disclosure arrow and you can see that you have all the markers. Now if you did this correctly, which I didn't, but if you did this correctly, you would have the names here and they'd be listed. So what you would have here is your marker that says this is the jet takeoff. So it says jet takeoff, and all I have to do really is I can just drag from the bin into my timeline, and it will take the duration of my spanned markers, my duration markers. It will take that duration as this kind of sub clip or in and out point. So all I have to do is drag it right down into A3, and it's only taking the portion of the clip that is marked between the duration markers. So we can play that back. And
possible to shoot it, we wanted permission.
Right, and there we have our effects. And then we can do the last one as well, our loud prop plane. We can come down to our edit index and we can double click on this last prop plane. Our timeline will jump to the prop plane, go back up to our bin, find the loud prop duration marker in our bin, and then just drag that right down to the location, and then we'll have the sound effect. And that's it. And that's adding the sound effects from the markers. Now, one of the things that we talked about before is that when you select a clip, it selects the audio associated with it. So if I selected the audio of a clip, it would select the picture with it because they're linked together. And you can see these little white dots that are next to them that indicate these clips are linked together. And this one has a white dot and it selects the associated clip, the video clip that's with it. These sound effects don't have any link or any relationship to the picture. So this A380 takeoff has no understanding that this sound effect goes with it, but you can create that in Resolve. And the way you do that is just by selecting the sound effect and then holding down the command on Mac or the control key on Windows and clicking the video track that you want to associate with it. And then once you right click, you can say link clips. And when you do that, it creates the relationship between the two so that when you do select one, it selects the other. And you can pick them up and move them around and they act like they were one clip. And let's do that for the rest of the sound effects clips. You can just come in and select the Maldives clip and the sound effect that's under it, right click and choose linked clips. And do that one for the South Pole as well. And now you have all your sound effects linked together with the picture that they go with. Okay. And now we're going to move on to mixing audio in the edit page. And to do that, the first thing you want to do is you generally would go through, when you're ready to do some mixing, is to go through and figure out what's on each track. So you have solo and mute buttons on each track, S and M, solo and mute. And if I only wanted to hear the sound effects, I could hit the solo button and I could start playing. And you don't hear any of the music or the dialogue because they've just soloed. Now you can also hit a mute track. So if I just wanted to mute out the music, now I would hear the narration and the sound effects.
It was possible to shoot it. We wanted to shoot.
But not the music, right? So you have these solo and mute buttons, and you can certainly solo and mute multiple things at once. We're going to start by just soloing the narration track because this is our primary track of audio. And you usually start by mixing your primary track of audio. Now, the goal on the edit page is really clip mixing. You're trying to get all the clips on one track that are the same, for instance, this narration, to be at the same level, right? We're not mixing this track as much as we're going through each clip and setting them at the optimal level for the track type. So on narration, you want this to be the loudest track, right? Because it's the primary track. And in general, there is no easy way to figure out what the target is for the level. But generally what you can do is we can come around here and you can basically turn on your inspector, and you have at the top of the inspector, when you select an audio clip, you have an audio tab. And here in the inspector, when you have audio selected, you have a clip volume. So you can choose to raise and lower the clip volume just like we did in lesson 1. So what we're also going to turn on is the mixer, because the mixer is where you're going to get your meters. And this is the time where you can start to explain meters to people and start to say, okay, on my narration track, which is the primary track, which should be the loudest track, what I'm trying to get at is an average level of around -12. Now, in the slide presentation, we go through a little bit of detail about target tracks and the target dB and what dB is, and how to target different types of audio like narration, music, sound effects, and where you should end up kind of on average in your meters. So you have something to begin with, some target area to begin with. So what you would do is you would play over this first clip.
In this film, making a documentary about how the airplanes changed the world, it was really important to go out and shoot.
And what you're really interested in is the full bar, not the peak that's up the top. The peak is okay. You don't want it to go above 0 or even at 0, the peak, but you're really interested in this main bar, which is called an RMS meter. It's kind of the average sound that you're listening to. Now, RMS meters are kind of similar to old VU meters. They don't have the same ballistics as a peak meter, so it's not showing you the peaks. It's showing you kind of the average or the root mean squared of the audio at that time. And what you want that to end up for this dialogue, for this narration, is somewhere around -12. So we're looking at right around here is around -12. And what you can do is you can just start playing and watch it, and as you're playing it, you can adjust your clip volume in the inspector.
In this film, making a documentary about how the airplanes
Now remember, you're not looking at that red peak.
changed the world. It was really important to go out and shoot the real world.
That's not bad. It's not a bad level at all. I'm going to probably just increase it a little bit in my clip volume.
In this film, making a documentary about how the airplanes changed the world, it was really important to go out and shoot the real world.
So that's a little louder than you might want, but it's fine. I'm going to leave it there. I think it's a good level. Now, once you've adjusted something using the clip volume or any however you may do it. If you have other clips, like I have all these narration clips that came from the same interview at the same time using the same microphone. So what I can do is copy this level from this clip and paste it onto these. Just like we used paste attributes before, we can use it for audio in this situation. So I'm going to select my audio clip, go up to the edit menu and choose copy, right? I'm going to select all the audio clips on my audio 1 track, and you can just lasso them if you want, or you can command or control clip on each clip. So they're all selected, and then I can come back up to the edit menu and choose paste attributes. Now remember, we used paste attributes when we were doing the video clip where we repositioned the interview, but here we're going to choose it, and we're going to come down, not choose position. We're going to turn on volume, right? Because we adjusted the volume in this case, and we want to paste that onto these clips here. So I'm going to click the volume checkbox and then click apply. And now the volume levels on all of these interviews should end up being somewhere around -10, maybe just a little bit below that.
If it's possible to shoot it, we wanted to go shoot it. If we couldn't get the shot or the weather wasn't right, we would either go back to that location or it didn't make the movie.
And you can see how it fall pretty much in place in between the 10 and the 15, which is really just where I want them to be. Because what I'm looking at, it doesn't matter if these are too loud or too soft across the board, but they all need to be normalized. They all need to be at the same level, so then I can treat them later as a track in the Fairlight page. And we would do the same thing for the sound effects track. So I'm just going to come to this first sound effects, and like I said, the narration I'm targeting around -12, maybe sound effects, depending on what type of sound effects it is. I might go between -10 on my meter if it's a loud sound effect, or it might be down at -30 if it's just something like crickets. So you have to listen, and you have to pay attention to what the sound effect is to know exactly where you should target. This is a moderate sound effect. It is a jet taking off, but it's not going to be the loudest sound. I still want it to be fairly low. So I'm going to target somewhere around the -20, -30 area for this sound effects that I'm listening to right here. And again, for this, it's on audio 3, so this is what we're looking at. This is the narration, right? Audio 1. This is the music on audio 2, and this is audio 3. Now, we also have to come over and turn off the solo and turn on the solo for audio 3 to listen to it. So it's definitely louder than we would like it to be. So we could come up to the inspector and choose the volume, but you can also come down into the clip itself, and you see this thin white line here. And this thin white line is called a volume line. And you can click on it and drag it down to lower the volume of the clip. It's just like using the volume slider in the inspector, except it's right here in the timeline, so it's a little bit more convenient. So I'm going to bring it down, maybe, I'm bringing it down somewhere around -8 or something like that, and we'll play it again and watch the meters. Now that's a lot better. It's falling right in between -30 and -20 at its loudest point, so that's exactly where I want it to be. Now you could copy and paste these, but I'm not going to do that for these sound effects. I'm going to move right onto my music, and I'm going to turn off the solo for the music there, and I'm just going to turn on the solo for my music on audio 2. So the music is a little bit different. Normally music in the background would fall somewhere between -20 and -30, so it would be pretty similar to quiet sound effects. But this is a little bit different because this music needs to go up and down, right? It needs to set a low level when he's talking, but when he's not talking, it could be louder. So what we're going to do is find a good level for the music when he is talking, and that's going to fall somewhere around, the low end here, -30, maybe somewhere around here. So what I'm going to do is just start to maybe play it in the middle of this interview, because that's where the music actually comes in. It's kind of fading up in the beginning. So I'm going to go to the middle, and I'm just going to play it, and we should see the music on audio 2 somewhere around -30, so maybe a little bit lower than what we're looking at here. So I'm just going to come over to my volume line and drag it down a little bit maybe come back and play it. Now you can see this, the main bar here is really hovering just around here, not the peaks. We don't care about the peaks as much as this median, this RMS meter. So that's just about right. But we needed to have a different volume when there is no dialogue, right? So when there is dialogue, that's a fine point to be at. But when there isn't dialogue, we'd like to boost it up. So you can set keyframes to do that in the timeline. So what we're going to do is come to the end of his first dialogue, his first narration, sorry. And then we're just going to hold down the Option key or the Alt key on Windows, come over to the line, and you'll see you get a different type of up and down cursor. When you get that, you can click on it, and it adds a keyframe at that frame. Now remember, we talked about keyframes before, and you need 2 keyframes, a starting point and an ending point. That's going to be our ending point, and we'll back it up just a little bit, maybe on his last word or something like that, and I'll Option click again to add my first keyframe. Now I can come to the second one and just raise it up a little bit so that when he's talking, it's going to be quiet, and we can look at our meters, and maybe it's going to be closer to -20, right around -20. You can see it bouncing right around there, maybe a little bit too loud, so I might want to bring that down just a little bit. And that's looking pretty good in our meters. So that's how you set your audio, whether in the inspector, or on the clip level, or with keyframing music. The last thing that you might want to do with music is exactly what you did with video, and that's a quick fade in. Now you could use these keyframes to do a fade in, but if you hover over any audio clip, you'll get those same white handles that you got on the video track, and they're fade handles. So on this music track, if we want to fade it in, I'll just come to the beginning and just drag it in a little bit, maybe all the way through his narration there in the opening, so that it fades in nice and slow. Right, and that's pretty good. And now I can turn off my solo and hear it all together.
In this film, making a documentary about how the airplanes changed the world, it was really important to go out and shoot the real world. If it was possible to shoot it, we wanted to shoot it.
Now we have some other fixes to do, but we'll be able to do that in the Fairlight page if we want to. And that takes care of audio editing in the edit page, where we did clip level adjustments. Now we're going to go into the Fairlight page in the next lesson and do more track-based mixing. Okay, so this is the end of lesson 7, and the next lesson will be lesson 8. It's similar audio material in the Fairlight page.